Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Dr. Coffee is back on the line. How you doing, Dr. Steve?
Another day above ground, living the dream, my friend. Living the dream.
Same here. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, one of my favorite podcasts that I do. Love talking about coffee, love talking about the science behind coffee, such a underinformed, underexposed side of life. So last time that we spoke, we dug really deep into, as you put it, the good in the coffee, talking about antioxidants especially, such a huge role that antioxidants play. But there's another side to coffee. I love how you put it. We talked about the good, now it's time to talk about the bad and the ugly, the crap you don't want in your coffee. Let's talk about that today, Dr. Steve. Do you want to talk about, I know there's lots of toxins and contaminants that can be found in all sorts of food products, but especially coffee. Just give us a little overview of what we're looking for and why coffee is especially susceptible to having contaminants.
Great question, Jordan. And let me take it and explain to our listeners about coffee and about the things that can go wrong, what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in your mind's eye, listeners, think of an orange and think of the orange growing on the tree. And the farmer who makes their living growing these oranges wants to protect his crop or her crop.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they'll do is they'll go through the orange groves and they'll spray the skin of the orange with some pesticides or some herbicides, and they'll spray chemicals of different sorts to handle different things. A lot of that spray stays on the outside. The skin of the orange is nice and thick, and it's got a wax on it, and it's got a bitter element so that the bugs don't bite into it. And they're able to get by with non-organic farming.
Mm-hmm.
But now think in your mind's eye of this nice little coffee bean, which has got a cherry and it's got a bean, and they're spraying it and they're using pesticides on it. And now you're going to break it down and boil it in one form or another, use hot water, hot steam, one way to extract out of it coffee, the liquid. You're carrying with that all the contaminants that are in it versus the orange. Can you see in your mind's eye how those are different?
Yeah, vastly different. And that's a really good point because the coffee brewing process is an extraction process in itself, kind of, right? You're taking out all the compounds within the coffee, the ones we've discussed, all these different complex chemical compounds. I can't imagine that the pesticides would be any different. In fact, I know that concentrating them can actually do just that. It can draw them out and make them a more potent, concentrated form, right?
Absolutely. And that's why if you're not using an organically grown and properly sourced, properly processed, and properly tested coffee, you don't know what you're drinking.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Purity Coffee is, trying to become the coffee of doctors, because we are an organic coffee, which instantly separates something like 99% or 97% of the world's coffee right there. But we also test, we don't take people's words, for that. Like you said, Dr. Steve, it's important to sympathize with the farmer because their livelihood is on the line, right? They're trying to feed their family over there, and an infestation or an infection of mold or some sort of disease is a serious threat to their livelihood and their families. But unfortunately, we just can't be putting that stuff in our bodies, as coffee drinkers. So it's a balancing act. But we don't trust anyone's word at Purity. We do test after test after test, and that's what really separates us.
Absolutely. So the whole idea with putting Purity together was to put together a medicinal grade coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear about these supplements that are pharmaceutical grade or medicinal grade, or are in pharmaceutical grade laboratories that they're made. Well, what Purity's tried to do is put together, and succeeded, put together a medicinal grade coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you also want to align yourself with the proper certification. So I read often on different coffees and how they say they're organic, but when you go to look up their organic certification, it's not USDA, which
Hmm.
is the gold standard. I don't care what anybody says on the internet. The USDA is the gold standard for organic coffee.
Wow.
And if they're saying, well, we're not using USDA, we've got this other group we're working with, and it's even more strict than USDA, that's gobbledygook as far as I'm concerned. It's just not true.
Fascinating.
And then the next thing they'll do is they'll say that they're fair trade,
Mm-hmm.
and then you look for the fair trade certification, the label that they use for fair trade, and they're not using that. They've got something that you go search, and it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's made up.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you have to be careful with what the test results show. So, what we want to look for is to make sure that there's no pesticides, no herbicides,
Mm-hmm.
that there's no mold, and no toxins of any kind, like mycotoxins. And I think let's go with the controversy that's happening with Roundup.
Yes.
So I don't want to get sued by Monsanto. But Roundup. I have a friend in Florida who has a testing company, an allergy testing company, and they also do testing for Roundup,
Mm.
and they look for Roundup in the blood because they feel it's a heavy toxin,
Wow.
and it's glyphosate,
Right.
which is the chemical. And once it gets into the water system or the soil system, it goes everywhere. So if a farmer is trying to build a better product to sell, and he's using Roundup or any of the other pesticides or herbicides, it's getting concentrated in the coffee. And then when you roast the bean, and then grind the bean, and then throw steam or hot water through it, you're just leaching out all those things. There's a word for it in drugs. They're called excipients.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, a drug will put an excipient like to hold the tablet together.
Mm-hmm.
But there can also be in nutraceuticals, not pharmaceuticals, but supplements and stuff, chemicals that are not wanted there. And that can happen in a coffee bean as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting too because we did an episode a while back. I did an episode with Roscoe Wallace. He's a chemical analyst
Hmm.
by trade, and he was talking about endosulfan, a specific pesticide that was used in Brazil on their coffee plant. Oh no, I'm sorry, in Colombia on their coffee. It's used all over the world, but it was specifically so heavily used in Colombia. And they phased it out supposedly because this stuff is so harmful. It does all this crazy stuff to your body. It messes with your ATP or like adenosine triphosphate. I'm sure as a doctor you know how like scary of a of a prospect that is. It does all this horrible, weird stuff to your biology. And they phased it out. But I was talking with Roscoe, and he said, there's vats and vats and tubs of this stuff all over the planet. It doesn't just it doesn't just disappear. Okay, like this is going to get siphoned to more gray, like less regulated markets. This is going to get dumped. This stuff is still out there. So it was just a really interesting prospect. I had never thought we're working to get rid of this stuff, but it's a slow and tough process to eliminate this stuff from the coffee supply chain, right?
Absolutely. You've got to supposedly dump it somewhere. And where are you going to dump it that it's not going to get into the food? What's great about purity is that, if you grow coffee at high elevations, and you do proper organic farming, then there are very few bugs that are going to attack it. They don't come up to high elevations.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I know that purity is really particular about who they fair trade source with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But getting back to what we were discussing, we'll get too off track here. I know that there was a study published in Food Control,
Hmm.
which said that mycotoxin contamination could be widespread in commercially available coffees, as much as 50% for mold. And
Wow.
yeah.
So mycotoxin, now is that is, do molds fall under mycotoxins? What, help me with the clarity of the definition there.
they are they are both toxins for the plant. They're different but the same.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the moldy coffee. This is the stuff that got mold or some sort of mildew in the field, and then it's making it into your cup. Is this is a seriously common problem? Is what you're saying? And how do we control this? Who tests for this? Who controls this?
So it's checked for at different states during the growing, then the harvesting, then the roasting. So at each one of those states, they check for fungus-grown toxins. So the fungus on the coffee beans will produce a toxin that's called mycotoxin, or because of moisture or because of improper farming, you may
Mm.
get mold on the bean.
Hmm.
So it's checked for at all three areas: farming, harvesting, and roasting. Let me tell you that what really startles me is the higher rates of leukemia, non Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, sarcoma, and cancers of the skin, lips, stomach, and brain and prostate, all related to negative outcomes due to mold and mycotoxins. So if you can avoid it, and let's do the right mindset. We're drinking coffee as a medicinal herb.
Hmm.
We're not drinking just a cup of joe to put your feet up and have a good time. We're actually going to drink coffee to better our health. And I was just working on two reports today. One report was on oral cancer,
Hmm.
and the other was cancer of the pharynx. And what they found was both 39% and 49%, respectively, decrease in cancer of those two areas of the mouth with people that drank at least 4 cups of a good quality caffeinated coffee per day.
Wow. So that's something that I hadn't heard before. I've heard a lot of different studies on a lot of different cancers, but that's interesting, and that's the kind of stuff that I love to hear on this podcast and keep everybody up to date who wants to know about this stuff. But that surprises me. I mean, listen, I've researched the effects of pesticides for some of my other shows, and they can cause all sorts of cancers and disfigurements and biological issues. Like I said, I didn't know that mold and mycotoxins could cause serious chronic diseases like that. I thought they just kind of made you sick. That's news to me.
No, not only do they make you sick, they can cause significant debilitating disease. And part
Wow.
of the reason is that once they get into your system, then they go through the blood and they change the quality of the blood, but they also change the quality of the microbiome, the layer in the gut
Hmm.
that has so much to do with our digestive system. And once you start screwing around with that, ask any woman that has had uh, um, a vaginal yeast infection as to whether it's any fun.
Right.
It can really make you sick. It can have respiratory and neurological problems,
Right.
not just an itching problem.
I didn't think about it like
And
that. Yeah.
so mold and mildew, mold and mycotoxins, mold and pesticides are definitely a no-no for coffee. They really are the bad and the ugly, and they can lead to things like irritated eyes, throat, and mouth, runny nose, wheezing, skin rash, eczema, headache, fatigue. What else am I thinking? Gastrointestinal upset and diarrhea.
Hmm.
All of those things, you can have a cup of coffee, it's a bad quality coffee, and you can get symptoms just like that. It's almost like a food poisoning.
Right. And you said something that it's similar to like an allergy or a bad reaction, like a sensitivity. Except this is something that no one is supposed to be putting in their body. So, and it makes me wonder when people say, "Oh, my body has a negative reaction to coffee." My first thought is, "Well, what coffee are you drinking?"
Absolutely, and especially for people that have a compromised immune system. So, in computers,
Hmm.
there's this old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
It's the same thing with chemicals and coffee, garbage in, garbage out. So, if you have a broken down immune system and you're taking in really poor quality coffee, and we're going to do a report on cancer, you and I, in another time.
Hmm.
And I hope you'll also have me back to do something on water. But let's talk about water for just a minute, please,
Certainly.
because you're not making coffee with swamp water.
Right.
You're making coffee with the very best water you can make. I'll make a an espresso with purity and my espresso maker, and my wife will look at me and go, "Why are you using that water? It's so expensive." I go, "Right, I'm making myself a medicine here.
I love
I'm
it.
making myself a 3 cup pot of medicine, and I'm only going to use the best water I can use for that."
Yeah, tap water is rough. City water has either chlorine or chloramine in it, guaranteed. Chloramine, just a more stable and potent version of chlorine. And that's just the beginning. All the other, so many weird minerals and contaminants in tap water. But also, you can, like you said, you can get pretty fancy with water. Some alkalized stuff, like properly pHed water. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
We're and we're going to save some of that for
Yes, another
a
episode.
time where we do a podcast on water. Let's save that
Hmm.
for then.
Interesting. I love it. But what I wanted to kind of land on here was the whole, like you said, the whole overarching theme here, which is we're trying to boost health effects, and anything that counteracts the coffee's health effects is completely going against the whole purpose, right? So I just think it's really important that we educate people on this and say not all coffee is created equal. You need to know what's in your coffee, how it's being sourced, and that can have a drastic effect on how it affects your body, right?
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to some of the things like caffeine. Now, I happen to be a caffeine lover. I think caffeine is good for you. I think caffeine improves cognitive function and may prevent the development of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And I think caffeine has a whole host of other good things, like with headaches and weight
Hmm.
loss and preventing diabetes. But what happens if you're drinking a coffee in which they're using a non Swiss water process to get the caffeine out because you're caffeine sensitive? So let's say they're using chemicals to leach it out.
Mm.
Well, that's a big no-no in my book. I'd rather see the person use caffeine, even if they're sensitive to it, and use some L-theanine to help with that sensitivity than I would to see them leach it out with heavy chemicals. Now, I know Purity does have a uh, decaf
Hmm. Blend.
bean
Yes.
that they're using with Swiss water process, correct?
I believe so. And that's a really good point. You got to keep your eye on the prize here. Reduction in inflammation might not be, super effective if, like you said, you're drinking chemicals from the decaffeination process, pesticides, and mycotoxins all at the same time.
I want to kind of recap for us from the last time we talked till today.
Hmm.
There's the good, the bad, the ugly. If you want to use coffee as a medicinal herb, and there are reasons that you want to do that, and we're going to go through cancer, and we're going to go through heart disease, and we're going to go through brain health, and we're going to go through degenerative disease and neurological diseases in these podcasts in the future. But if you're using coffee as a medicinal herb, you want to drink 4 cups a day. You want to drink the best coffee that you can, and that coffee should be farmed at high elevations, uh, so that it has low acidity,
Mm-hmm.
a pleasing flavor. You want to use an Arabica bean. You want to make sure that it's harvested when it's mature, that it's premium hand harvesting, not machine stripping. You
Mm-hmm.
want to then have your coffee roasted to medium roast, because let me tell you, there's other coffees out there that are higher antioxidant than Purity, but they roast them so low that they have a lot of the bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't want that. So we're looking at what's the absolute best way to balance everything so that you're making it the highest medicinal quality. You don't want high levels of acrylamide. You don't want polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want diminished antioxidant capacity because of over roasting. You do want healthy chlorogenic acids at the best balance that you can. And then you want to make sure there's no mold, no mycotoxins, no pesticide, no herbicide, no Roundup. And then you want to make it properly. So you want to make your 4 cups. You want to grind it right before, and we'll talk about grinding and roasting and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
extraction methods. But you want to grind your coffee right before you're going to brew it, unless you're using one of the K cups, which there aren't too many K cups out there that are recyclable. I know Purity has gone through the task of recyclable K cups.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be able to make your 4 cups of coffee so that they're the highest quality nutraceutical, like a vitamin.
Love it. Love it, Dr. Steve. Thank you so much for doing this. This has been a great overview of the good, the bad, and the ugly in coffee. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. And anybody wants to reach out to me at ibleedcoffee.com. I'm Dr. Coffee.
Love it. Everybody out there, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time on the Coffee, Health, and Science Podcast.